So next up, we have Kevin Smith to come and talk to us from Plowden & Smith. And I really wanted a sort of private company to be represented here, as the IMF always has talks from private companies as well as government-funded institutions, and there's often a crossover in the sector. I met Kevin 11 years ago when I started work at Plowden & Smith, and I'm really pleased he's with us to give his experience and perspective of working in museums. So please welcome Kevin.
Thank you, Helen. I think we can all say that we've had some really great presentations earlier on, and seeing what it's like for a forum to have the different experience explained to us. And as has just been said, I come from another angle, coming in from the commercial world, working in as a Mountmaker to come to museums to work on your collections. I'll be talking about our company and some of the exhibitions that we've been involved with, and also my view as a commercial rather than a museum Mountmaker. I'll then go through a couple of very quick case studies, which I hope you'll find interesting. There are some interesting objects and problems to solve. I'll then look at a couple of advances in the requirements in conservation that are affecting the work and the materials that we can use. But a bit about Plowden & Smith. In 1966, after 13 years working in the British Museum Research Laboratory, which was the early name for the Conservation Department, Peter Smith started the restoration company that would become Plowden & Smith. He worked closely with Anna Plowden, who had trained and then taught at the Institute of Archaeology. She'd also started her company around the same time. Now, specifically, their companies were conservation-based, supplying museum-quality conservation to the London antiques trade. But this work inevitably led to the presentation of the objects, and so to mounting and display work. Now, at this time, there was little in way of mounting, and Peter would say that at the time, a museum display were an object placed on a block, and if you wanted it higher in the case, you piled another block on top of the earlier block. But at that time, early exhibition work followed, and the exhibitions, they did exhibitions at the Royal Academy, at the Hayward Gallery, the Victoria and Albert Museum, and elsewhere. In 1976, 40 years ago, Peter and his team were Mountmakers for the Art of Islam exhibition and the Sacred Circles, and internationally at the Norton Simon Museum of Art in Pasadena, Los Angeles. In 1985, both companies combined to become Plowden & Smith when they moved to a new premises in Wandsworth, southwest London. Now, if you can see a family resemblance, you'll be correct. It's frightening to think that this photograph was taken the year just before I started with the company, and I'm now 8 years older than he was then. Having always been around the workshop as a small child, childcare at that time was in its early stages in the 60s, I got to know my way around the workshops and tools and materials, and it was always a good source of pocket money during the summer holidays, child exploitation as well. But in 1978, I accompanied my father to California on trips that he was going on to set up the Norton Simon Museum. Couldn't really complain about that. And then, after gaining a degree in physics and studying at the Institute of Archaeology, I started full-time with the company in 1986. The first exhibition I worked on was 100 Years of Coca-Cola at the Victoria and Albert Museum Boiler House Gallery. For me, this was very memorable for being told to shoulder barge a tall pile of crated Coke bottles that we'd linked together with a steel cable to show that they were securely held down, all in the name of health and safety, of course. But still today, we're ostensibly a conservation company. We have 30 staff, 5 of which are accredited by their professional bodies, and from 7 countries around the world, 8 if you count Scotland. And we've managed to drag an expat back from Qatar to join us as well. We continue to provide an exhibition mounting and installation service in the UK and around the world. We work on museum projects, but also with private collectors, displaying works within their homes, and commercial or industrial institutions displaying works in boardrooms or galleries. But isn't our job great? I think it's marvellous. When working in exhibitions, we are almost by definition working with spectacular objects, and they're telling an interesting story. The staff we are working with are knowledgeable about their pieces, they're helpful, and they have enthusiasm and drive. We have the privilege of handling these objects when everybody else will be seeing them through the glass or from a distance, and we can use our skills to support them securely and show them off to their best effect. Now, the overall exhibition projects are the culmination of a considerable amount of effort: planning, collecting, research, design, conservation, fundraising. Perhaps we should thank the HLF. And the mount making and installation work is part of the last lap of that great undertaking. And so we're able to enjoy the buzz and the excitement that all of that generates. And we get invited to the Smart Opening event. But tell me, all of our experiences are different, but who wouldn't be excited to say that they have held and made a mount for a gold finger and toe coverings that were on Tutankhamun's mummified remains and his sandals? But alongside this and all the excitement, we also have a great responsibility. We know our job, we know how to approach making a mount, but we cannot know all about the object. We need a good working connection with the people who do know the objects well. Any work we do has to be with the agreement, the approval of these custodians. The relationship of trust and confidence that's built up with these people is essential to making the project go smoothly. We are, after all, coming into their museum and working on their objects. Let's look what can face us in a very large exhibition project. Fortunately, this is one of the biggest that we've dealt with. Inevitably, it's these larger exhibitions and more complex projects that stay in one's mind. Multiple galleries with significant numbers of showcase and a variety of objects. Now, we were responsible for the mount making and installation of the vast majority of these objects. But alongside all these 17 galleries, there was also what was called a menu wall. Now, fortunately, later they renamed it the Window on the World. But this huge display case highlights a vast selection of objects that relate to the themes in the other galleries in the museums. And although the large industrial objects were thankfully installed by other people, we did mount two 5.5 metre long, 250 kilogram scrimshawed sperm whale jawbones, difficult to say, I'm sorry, and a 300 kilogram girder section from the Tay Bridge. But on top of that, there was the myriad of other mounted objects. The variety, the size, the complexity, not to mention the weight and the quantity of the objects, each have their own problems to overcome. Very few mounts, I'm sure you'll agree, are ever made the same. Now, the extent of projects on this scale require close cooperation with the museum staff and the main contractors under whose contract we're often employed. Having a team of many staff working in different areas around the museum, requiring access to objects, access to galleries, to the showcases, is a considerable challenge, not only to us, but also to the museum team as well. Then, of course, there's all the additional complications which will throw out the best laid plans. Objects not being available, still on loan, still in conservation, showcases not being completed, doors still sticking, the alarms not working, and the graphics are being delayed, and lots of other unknown unknowns. Now, during this particular project, we were delayed for 3 days because of snow. The objects can be brought through across the city from the museum store. Now, to many of you, of course, these experiences are not anything new. But, so what's the purpose? What do I think the purpose is for the forum? Now, I think it is to look and discuss case studies, to share the experiences, and to discuss the developments that are affecting our work, to share that knowledge. So, to put my money where my mouth is, I'll quickly go through 2 object mounts that were a challenge for us and some materials information that we've got. The first one is for a support of a large dhow boat model, which was for the National Charter Museum in Bahrain. Now, amongst all the other mounts and the drawings that came through to us, the initial specification for an acrylic support seemed very straightforward. However, this quickly evolved into a multiple glass blade structure. Now, if this was made in acrylic, the production could have been carried out on site. And any adjustments were made there and made along the way. But for glass, that's not possible. So templates had to be taken of all of these sections where the glass would be going across, and the support had to be made and constructed here in the UK and then shipped over complete in one piece. Now, my major concern was there was too little or no chance of any adjustment when we got to site. Now, I'm sure that soon we'll have an app on my phone that I can scan the hull and it will go straight to a 3D printer. And in fact, at lunch, we were sort of talking about some of these things that are almost available to us now. But at that time, we had to do it by templates. The blades were waterjet cut from the digitized prints of the templates. The edges were polished, and it was glued and packed for shipping. We had a shipping crate custom made for it. The end would come off to allow it to slide in on its trolley easily. What more could we do? When it arrived to site, we can only guess that customs, in their wisdom, insisted on opening the crate. The support was dislodged, and when it was lifted out, and in closing it up, the lid wasn't replaced correctly. Upshot of it was the support was cracked in two places, a write-off. The only benefit we could take out of it was that we could try it on the object and see that it fitted. Another support had to be made, cut, constructed, and shipped over very quickly. We were more fortunate the second time, and that's good if you can have insurance and a good backup team. But being able to make complex mounts on site can save a lot of problems and cost. And that takes me on to my second case study. This case study is the mounting of a large statue of Tutankhamun. This was from a touring exhibition of Tutankhamun and the World of the Pharaohs that started in Vienna. This 3.3 metre high and 3.8 tonne statue had previously been displayed in a large sand bucket, hiding about 25% of the sculpture and making it look quite strange. Sorry about the image, it's a very poor one there. Now, this approach lost a large amount of the object. Not that there was much detail in that part of the object, but the shape was lost. We proposed to support it onto a wooden and resin pad with a steel support and a top stabilizer. Now, under the cladding of the plinth and the black backboard here are a very large steel girder construction. Now, manipulating, as you can see, the statue was a challenge in itself. But then also it was trying to align the statue vertically with so many straps on it. The pad and the steel support were made at ground level on a steel plate, and once in position on the plinth, the top stabilizer was fitted. This also had a moulded pad that located into an existing cavity in the head and was securely fixed into the backboard girder construction. The completed installation regained the presence of the statue, which surely befits a king. And under the show lights, it looked even better. The mount was made over a 2-day period in a workshop we set up in an unused corridor of the venue. This was a temporary travelling exhibition, and the mount lasted the run of the tour, which was about 4 years. And it was installed and deinstalled in 6 international venues. Now, I promised Helen that I would talk about some new materials and the pressure on everybody to be greener. We're all aware that there's a move away from the use of MDF and even ZF MDF in exhibition installations. From a pure conservation of objects point of view, I can see that this is a sensible advance. From a practical point of view, my thoughts are that this may be overzealous and one which may not be cost effective. But these aren't our decisions, however, they are usually our problems to overcome. A recent project that we worked on had this requirement, and the designer, fortunately, had specified a recycled plastic material that ticked the boxes. It was strong, it was durable. There's a bit of it here I brought along as a visual cue. And now I've lost my place. It cuts cleanly, it took screws and could be tapped to take bolts. And as it was recycled, it ticked the green box as well. And I don't know whether anybody have noticed, but when we came to spray it, the paint would not hold. It was at that stage that I looked up the spec sheet and spotted that the material had been developed for a children's playground and it had an anti-graffiti additive. Now, different types of surface preparation were tested, and we ended up with a solution that worked, as long as you didn't run your fingernail along it. Fortunately, it's in a showcase. Once it was positioned, nobody was touching it. We later had to add frames around the graphics panels because the adhesive that they had used had also given way as well. So things had to be securely fixed. So in conclusion, I don't recommend this as an alternative. However, we have identified a recycled acrylic sheeting. This is called green cast. It comes in a variety of colours and thickness and is slightly more expensive than standard grades of acrylic and is not as readily available, but it is there if a project requires it. But looking for new materials that cover the more stringent requirements for use of materials in museums is very difficult. You know, there's not the demand for the quantities that there is for the building and construction industries. ZFMDF took a while to be produced, and I think that this was more to do with the concern of the formaldehyde vapours affecting people rather than pressure from the museum world. Now, this will inevitably mean that any materials that are identified as useful are likely to be difficult to find in the sizes needed and be expensive. But as an alternative, we have reverted to an old material to use some steel. This is readily available and can be cut and shaped easily to achieve the display elements that are required. Backboards, sloping plinths and bridges are shown here. Now, because it's strong, it can be very thin, so quite subtle. Steel, of course, can be drilled and tapped for fixing mounts, but we've found that small pot magnets can be a successful alternative. Magnets have been spoken about earlier on. Small clips can be fitted to the magnets, and some magnets can be embedded in the mount boards, and these hold even quite large mounted prints very well. But rods can also be fitted to the magnets. So armatures can be placed in them. And once they're on the steel base, they're incredibly stable. Now, because the magnets don't damage the base or the walls, they become reusable. And this also allows for that ever-present danger of last-minute changes or for that additional object that needs to be squeezed into the showcase. You haven't got any holes to deal with. So my recommendation here is have a go, try, see how it works. So in conclusion, I think that this type of forum can be a very valuable resource for us all. I think informal discussions and case studies and the passing on of knowledge can be beneficial to all of us. Now, to me, mount making is an extension of conservation by other means, and sharing knowledge for that purpose is important. So thank you, Helen and Sam, for setting it up, and let's hope it's a great success. Thank you.